I spent 28 years making sure nobody died on my watch, but this spoiled kid thought safety was just something that slowed down his profits. He fired me for refusing to use his experimental explosives, then watched his whole operation blow up in his face. What we found in the wreckage wasn't just twisted metal, it was evidence of his family's arms dealing operation. I'm Bob Caldwell, 48 years old, and this is how I went from unemployed to exposing an international weapons ring. The morning everything went sideways started normal enough. I was down in Section 7 at Hawthorne Mining, checking my blast pattern for the third time. 24 holes, each one loaded with ANFO and timed to drop 50,000 tons of limestone exactly where we needed it. My multimeter showed green across all circuits. Good to go. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. Wrong kind of footsteps, too light, too quick. These weren't work boots. Caldwell. I finished my continuity check before turning around. Braden Hawthorne Jr. was standing there in his designer safety gear, checking some fancy watch that probably cost more than my truck. 29 years old, fresh MBA, and he'd been running this place for exactly 3 weeks, Mr. Hawthorne, I said, wiping my hands on my coveralls. You're inside the blast zone. We go live in 25 minutes. Change of plans. He was already pulling out his phone. I've got precision charges coming in 10 minutes. Half the yield, twice the accuracy. My blood pressure went up about 20 points. What precision charges? I haven't seen any safety data. That's the beauty of it, Braden said, like he was explaining something to a child. These are military-grade demolition charges, modified for civilian use. My contact at a defense contractor hooked us up. I stood up slowly. This kid was talking about using untested explosives on a live site. We stick with the approved ANFO pattern. That's what's been calculated for this geology. Come on, Caldwell. This isn't 1995. We're talking precision engineering here, not your grandfather's dynamite sticks. Kid, I said, keeping my voice level, I've been doing controlled demolition since you were in middle school. You don't experiment with unknown explosives. His face went red. I'm not kid, I'm your boss, and I didn't bring you back from the Stone Age so you could lecture me about innovation. The thing is, Section 7 sits right on top of a geological fault. I'd been mapping it for months, calculating blast patterns that would work with the unstable rock layers. Switch to different explosives with unknown burn rates, and all that careful planning goes out the window. The answer is no, I told him. We use tested procedures or we don't shoot at all. That's when Braden's eyes went cold. You're fired. Caldwell. He grabbed his radio. Security to Section 7. And Danny, get over here. You're taking over the blast. Danny Sullivan came running over from the equipment truck. Good kid, 23 years old, 6 months into his apprenticeship with me. The look on his face when he heard what was happening, pure terror. Sir, I'm not certified for lead blaster, Danny said, his voice shaking. Bob's been training me, but you have provisional credentials. Braden cut him off. That's enough. The new charges will be here in 5 minutes. I stepped between them. Danny, listen to me. You don't know the characteristics of these explosives. If you mistime the delays on this fault line, stop talking to my employee, Braden shouted. 2 security guards were already walking over. I knew both guys, they looked miserable about the whole thing. Sorry, Bob, one of them muttered. I looked at Danny one last time. The kid was holding that detonator like it might explode in his hands. Danny, I called as they walked me toward the gate. Check the burden distance on holes 18 through 24. If it's less than 8 feet, you deck those charges. You hear me? They drove me off the property, but I didn't go home. Instead, I took the old logging road up Miller's Ridge about 3 miles away with a clear view of the quarry valley. I parked my truck and waited. At 9:47 a.m., I felt it through the suspension before I heard anything. Not the sharp crack of a controlled blast, but a deep rolling boom that went on way too long. Wrong frequency, wrong duration. I got out and looked toward the valley. The dust cloud rising up wasn't the gray limestone dust you'd expect. It was brown and black. My phone rang before the sound even finished echoing off the hills. Bob, it was Tony Ricci, our union rep. Please tell me you weren't anywhere near Section 7. I'm up on Miller's Ridge. What happened? Danny tried to follow your pattern, but those charges burned too fast. The sequence got compressed. Instead of dropping the rock into the pit, it blew backward toward the facility. My stomach dropped, casualties, 4 injured, including Danny. He's alive, but they're airlifting him to Pittsburgh. And Bob, the blast didn't just take out the processing plant. It collapsed part of the old Section 4 tunnel system. Section 4 had been closed for 15 years, supposedly flooded out. But that brown dust cloud was telling a different story. Tony, I said, I'm coming back. Don't. Braden's already telling everyone you sabotaged the charges before you left. He's saying you rigged them to fail out of spite. I hung up and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Casey Reynolds, my old ATF contact from when I was disposing of leftover ordnance after getting out of the Marines. Casey, it's Bob Caldwell. I need to cash in that favor. You sound like you're calling from a disaster zone, Bob. What happened? Not a disaster zone yet, I said, watching emergency vehicles stream toward the quarry. But it will be if you don't get down to Hawthorne Mining in the next 2 hours. By evening, my face was on the local news. They were calling it an industrial sabotage incident, and I was the disgruntled former employee who'd supposedly rigged the blast to fail. The reporter made it sound like I'd blown up the place out of spite. I spent that night in my garage workshop, documenting everything. Every conversation with Braden, every safety protocol he'd ignored, every warning I'd given about those experimental charges. The Marines taught me to keep detailed logs, and those logs were about to save my reputation. Casey called at 11 p.m. Bob, I'm on scene with a joint ATF-BI task force. We need to meet. I'm listening. Those precision charges your boy used, they're modified M183 demolition charges. Someone stripped the military casings and repackaged them for civilian use. That makes this federal jurisdiction. Where did Braden get them? Still working on that. But when the blast collapsed that tunnel entrance, we found something interesting. Can you meet me at the old Section 4 access road in an hour? I drove out there in the dark, following Casey's government SUV down a muddy trail I hadn't used since Section 4 closed. She had 2 other agents with her, all wearing tactical gear. Local fire department found this checking for gas leaks, Casey said, pointing to where the tunnel entrance used to be. I shined my flashlight into the opening. Instead of the flooded tunnels I expected, I saw a dry storage space with military-grade shelving. Those shelves were packed with weapons crates. Jesus, I whispered. AK-47s, RPGs, even some Stinger missiles, Casey said. This isn't just a mining operation, Bob. Hawthorne Sr.'s been running an arms-dealing network. The quarry was cover. What about his son? That's where it gets interesting. Our financial investigation shows Braden Jr. has been ordering mining equipment through a defense contractor shell company, but the paper trail suggests he thought he was buying legitimate demolition supplies. I looked at those weapon crates, everything clicking into place. The old man was using his kid as an unwitting procurement agent. Braden thought he was modernizing the operation. He was actually buying illegal weapons, which means when you refused to use those modified charges, you probably prevented something much worse. If those explosives had been used in any other configuration, we might be looking at multiple casualties. The next 3 days were chaos. Gerald Hawthorne Sr. got arrested at his private airstrip trying to board a plane to somewhere without extradition treaties. The FBI found evidence connecting him to arms sales to at least 4 different criminal organizations. Braden Jr. turned himself in when he realized what his father had been using him for. The kid was arrogant and spoiled, but he wasn't a traitor. Once he understood the scope of what his old man had been doing, he cooperated completely with the federal investigation. As for me, all charges were dropped. The evidence was clear. I'd been fired for refusing to participate in what would have been the field test of illegal military ordnance. But here's the thing nobody talks about in these kinds of stories. Even when you're completely vindicated, even when you're proven right, there's still fallout. The quarry went into federal receivership while they sorted out which assets were proceeds from criminal activity. Every worker at Hawthorne Mining was suddenly unemployed. Guys with families, mortgages, kids in college, all out of work because of Gerald Hawthorne's greed. Tony Ricci came by my house about a week after the arrests. The pension fund's frozen, he told me over coffee in my kitchen. Feds are treating it as potentially tainted money until they can trace every deposit. Could take years to sort out. What about the guys, scattered to the wind? Some found work at other quarries, but most of those are union shops with waiting lists. Danny's still in the hospital, but he'll recover. Kids asking about you. I'd been thinking about Danny a lot. He was just following orders, trying to do what his boss told him. In a way, he was as much a victim as anyone. Tony, I said, what if there was another way? What do you mean? What if someone bought the quarry assets when they go to auction? Someone who knew the operation, who could get it running again. Tony looked at me like I'd lost my mind. With what money? And who'd want a blown-up quarry with a weapons cache in the basement? I'd been thinking about that too. I had my military disability payments, some money saved up from nearly 3 decades of steady work, and there were veteran business loans available, especially for guys who wanted to hire other veterans. Maybe someone who sees potential instead of problems, I said. The federal asset auction was scheduled for 6 months out. That gave me time to get my financing together. Time to put together a business plan that made sense. Time to figure out how to turn a disaster site into something useful. Casey stopped by the night before the auction. You sure about this, Bob? You're bidding on a property that was the center of an international arms dealing operation. I'm bidding on a training facility, I told her, place where we can teach people the right way to handle explosives. The auction was held in the county courthouse on a gray October morning. I sat in the back row wearing my only good suit, which was about 10 years old and tight in the shoulders. There weren't many bidders. Most people didn't want anything to do with a property that had been the center of an international weapons scandal. The auctioneer started the bidding at $2 million for the entire Hawthorne mining complex. That included 500 acres, all the equipment that hadn't been damaged in the blast, and the mineral rights. In normal circumstances, it would have been worth 10 times that much. These weren't normal circumstances. A real estate developer bid $2.2 million, probably thinking he could turn it into a shopping center or housing development. I bid $2.3 million. Another mining company went to $2.5 million. I went to $2.6 million. The bidding stalled there. Everyone else was doing the math on cleanup costs, environmental assessments, and the PR nightmare of being associated with the Hawthorne name. I was thinking about something different, potential. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Caldwell for $2.6 million. I walked out of that courthouse as the owner of what most people considered a contaminated industrial site, but I saw it differently. I saw the most realistic explosive training facility on the East Coast. The paperwork took another 2 months. Federal agencies had to certify that all the weapons had been removed from the underground storage areas. Environmental inspectors had to confirm that the blast hadn't released any hazardous materials. Insurance companies had to figure out how to write policies for a business that involved teaching people to blow things up safely. But by December, I was standing at the front gate with a crew of contractors, looking at plans for the Caldwell Defense Training Center. "You sure about this, Bob?" Tony Ricci asked. He was helping me coordinate the renovation work. "Lot of bad memories in this place. That's exactly why we need to do this," I told him. Turn something that represented greed and corruption into something that serves the community. The first thing we did was seal the old Section 4 tunnels permanently. Pumped them full of concrete until there was no trace left of Gerald Hawthorne's weapons storage. That part of the property would stay buried forever. Then we got to work on the training areas. We set up controlled blast zones where students could practice with different types of explosives under safe conditions. Built classrooms for the theory and safety protocols, created a realistic simulation area where law enforcement and military contractors could train for real-world scenarios. Danny Sullivan was my first hire. He'd made a full recovery from his injuries, but more importantly, he'd learned the hard way why safety protocols exist. Nobody would ever again convince that kid to cut corners on explosive safety. "You really want me back?" Danny asked when I offered him the job. "After what happened?" "What happened wasn't your fault," I told him. "You were put in an impossible situation by someone who should have known better. But you learned from it, and that's what makes you valuable now." Casey Reynolds helped me navigate the federal licensing requirements. Turns out there's a lot of paperwork involved in running a legitimate explosives training facility. Who knew? The ATF is actually excited about this, she told me one afternoon as we reviewed the permits. There aren't many places where law enforcement can get realistic demolitions training. Most of it's theoretical classroom stuff. That's the problem, I said. You can't learn to handle explosives by reading about it. You need hands-on experience under controlled conditions. By spring, we had our first class of students. 25 guys from various police bomb squads learning advanced demolitions techniques. Watching them work through the safety protocols I'd developed, seeing them understand why each step mattered, that was better than any paycheck. But the real satisfaction came a few months later when Braden Hawthorne Jr. showed up at my office. He'd served 18 months in minimum security federal prison. Part of his plea agreement included cooperation with ongoing investigations into his father's network. When he got out, most people in the industry wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, standing in my office doorway like a kid called to the principal. "I know I have no right to ask, but I was wondering if we could talk." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He looked different, thinner, humbler. Prison had knocked the arrogance out of him. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for everything, for firing you, for not listening, for putting Danny and the others at risk. I thought I knew better, but I didn't know anything." "Apology accepted," I said. "What are you planning to do now? That's what I wanted to ask you about." "I've been thinking about what you said that day, about safety protocols and proper procedures. I'd like to learn how to do things the right way." I studied his face. The cocky MBA who'd fired me was gone. This was someone who'd been humbled by consequences. "I might have a position open," I said. "Safety compliance officer. Making sure all our training programs meet federal standards, but it would mean starting at the bottom, learning the business from scratch." "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to learn how to do something useful." So I hired Gerald Hawthorne's son to help run the business I'd built on the ruins of his father's criminal empire. Some people thought I was crazy, but I've always believed in second chances. The irony wasn't lost on me. The spoiled rich kid who'd once called me old school was now learning safety protocols from the ground up. He was good at it too, once he stopped thinking he knew everything. Tony stopped by one evening as I was finishing up some paperwork. We stood on the porch of the main office, looking out over the training areas where tomorrow's class would be learning proper blast techniques. "You ever think about what would have happened if you just used those experimental charges that morning?" Tony asked. "All the time," I said. "If I'd compromised that morning, if I'd let him use those experimental charges, we never would have discovered the weapons cache. Gerald Hawthorne would still be running guns to terrorists, and his son would still be an unwitting accomplice. So getting fired was the best thing that happened to you. Getting fired was the best thing that happened to a lot of people I corrected, including Braden." 3 years later, the Caldwell Defense Training Center is booked solid 6 months in advance. We train bomb squad officers from 12 different states, military contractors preparing for overseas deployment, and federal agents who need realistic explosive scenarios. Danny runs our advanced demolitions course, and he's become one of the best instructors I've ever seen. Braden manages our safety compliance program and has probably prevented more accidents in 3 years than most people see in a career. He still drives a nice car and wears expensive clothes, but now he earned them through competence instead of inheritance. The old Section 7, where everything started, is now our main training pit. Students learn proper blast patterns on the same geology that nearly killed 4 people when handled incorrectly. There's a plaque there that reads, "Expertise earned through experience, respect the process." Last month, Casey Reynolds brought a group of new ATF agents through our program. Watching them practice evidence collection techniques on a simulated crime scene, I couldn't help thinking about how different things could have been if Gerald Hawthorne had succeeded in his plans. "You've built something special here, Bob," Casey told me as her agents packed up their gear. "This place has trained over 500 law enforcement officers in the past 3 years. It's not about the numbers," I said. "It's about making sure they go home safe to their families. That's really what it all comes down to. Every safety protocol, every procedure, every time we make someone repeat a sequence until they get it right, it's about bringing people home alive." The local newspaper did a feature story about us last year, calling it a remarkable transformation. They interviewed some of the workers who lost their jobs when Hawthorne Mining collapsed. Most of them said they were grateful the truth came out, even though it cost them their livelihoods in the short term. "Better to be unemployed than to unknowingly work for criminals," one of them told the reporter. "Danny's become something of a local celebrity. High schools invite him to speak about workplace safety and the importance of speaking up when something doesn't seem right. He tells students about the morning he almost died because he was afraid to challenge authority. Mr. Caldwell saved my life by refusing to compromise on safety," he always tells them. But more than that, he showed me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Braden gives talks too, mostly to business school students about corporate responsibility and the dangers of cutting corners. His story resonates with young executives who think they can disrupt traditional industries without understanding why those traditions exist. "Innovation without expertise is just expensive failure," he tells them. And in some industries, failure means people die. I'm 51 now, getting closer to an age when most people start thinking about retirement. But I can't imagine doing anything else. Every class that graduates from our program represents dozens of potential disasters prevented, hundreds of lives protected. We've expanded beyond just explosive training. We now offer courses in hazardous materials handling, industrial accident investigation, and workplace safety management. Companies send their supervisors here to learn how to maintain safety standards under pressure. The waiting list for our programs keeps growing. There's talk of opening a second facility in Texas, maybe a third in California. But growth has to be done carefully, with the right people who understand that this isn't just a business, it's a responsibility. Sometimes I walk through the facility in the evening, after the last class has finished. The buildings are quiet, the equipment secured, everything ready for tomorrow's training. It's peaceful in a way that the old Hawthorne Mining never was. Gerald Hawthorne is serving 15 years in federal prison. His appeals have been denied, and word is he's not handling incarceration well. I don't take any pleasure in that. I just hope other people in positions of trust understand that actions have consequences. The weapons he was selling ended up in the hands of criminal organizations in 3 different countries. The ATF estimates that shutting down his operation prevented those weapons from being used in terrorist attacks that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. Tony Ricci retired last year and now works part-time helping us coordinate with union training programs. He jokes that this is the first job site he's ever worked where management actually listens to safety concerns. Used to be you'd report a hazard and get told to work around it. He told our latest batch of supervisory trainees, "Here you report a hazard and everybody stops what they're doing until it's fixed. That's how it should be everywhere, but it isn't." Too many bosses still think safety is something that slows down production instead of something that protects their most valuable asset, their people. Looking back on that morning 3 years ago, I realized that getting fired for doing the right thing was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to take everything I'd learned over nearly 3 decades and figure out how to use it to make a real difference. The sign at our front gate reads Caldwell Defense Training Center, where experience meets expertise. But the unofficial motto, the one we tell every new student, is simpler. Everybody goes home safe. You know what? In this business, in this world, that's not just a motto, it's a promise we work every day to keep. Here's what I learned from all this. Experience isn't just about how long you've been doing something. It's about understanding why procedures exist and having the courage to follow them, even when somebody with authority tells you to cut corners. Your expertise has value, whether you're handling explosives or managing spreadsheets. Don't let anyone convince you that innovation means ignoring everything you've learned. And remember, doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Stand your ground when safety is on the line.